Good day, everyone. Today we'll be taking a look at Yoimiya and what team comms will most likely work best for her. And let's try to ignore Ball in the background getting in the way. Now, Yoimiya's kit seems to be designed to deal a significant amount of damage with her normal attacks, and then once finished with that, pop her ultimate to give the party a bit of an attack increase, in addition to then those party members being able to trigger Yoimiya's ultimate. Now, Yoimiya's ultimate itself does a pretty decent amount of damage. Personally speaking, I wouldn't really use, say, the Shiminawa set, as I don't think it's worth it unless you have enough energy, maybe you're using other Pyro characters, to still give her enough energy to be able to use her ultimate. You might as well, in my opinion, still just use, say, the Crimson Witch set or something along those lines. Now, unlike, say, Hu Tao, who gains a attack increase based on her health, Yoimiya just gains a damage bonus to her normal attacks. So for Yoimiya, the biggest things you probably want to build into are obviously crit rate and crit damage as usual, but you also probably want to have a decent amount of attack. So if you can use a character like, say, Bennett, or maybe even Barbara with, say, the Thrilling Tales, will probably be very beneficial to her personal damage. Now for weapons, there are really probably a great number of good options for Yoimiya. Thundering Pulse obviously is probably her best weapon, but even 4-star weapons will work very, very good as well. The Rust, obviously, it would be a great weapon for her. The Prototype Bow, as long as you are okay with getting headshots, is also a pretty good choice. And the new Crafted Bow also can work, but once again, kind of similar to using the Shiminawa artifact set, you probably need a lot of energy coming in to make sure that her ultimate is up during her stance change, and that you can still use it essentially off cooldown. Now, her constellations are all nice, but none of them are, I think, game-changing. Increasing the duration of her ultimate by 4 seconds, essentially allowing it to tick 2 more times, is nice, and then it also gives her an attack bonus when enemies afflicted by it are defeated. So, nice, but not needed. For her second constellation, when she scores a critical hit, she gains a 25% pyro damage bonus for 6 seconds. Very nice. Once again, not necessary. Now, her fourth constellation is probably the major one that would make a difference to her kit, as it would actually allow her to potentially be, instead of a character with decent downtime, just a straight-up main DPS. And her final constellation looks like it probably adds a pretty significant damage bonus as well, but again, not necessary. So really, I think it's the fourth constellation is the only one that will really change the way in which she can be played, but you can still play her without this. All these constellations are definitely very nice, but none of them are by any means necessary. Now, Yoimiya is more like the 4-star bow characters in the game than the 5-star bow characters in the game. And by that I mean, the 5-star bow characters in the game are all pretty AoE focused. Venti is extremely good at gathering enemies in a massive area, Child has a bunch of AoE procs in his toolkit, and Ganyu has a massive AoE ultimate, and the only character in the game with an AoE charged shot. The 4-star bow characters in the game are all pretty much single target. Their normal attacks and charged attack can only hit one enemy, and many of their abilities, let's say Fischl, are pretty much just hit one enemy at a time. Yoimiya is kind of along this way. She pretty much does damage to a single enemy. And in theory, I think this is a good concept. And when you then go to look at her kit, she seems to be a strong embodiment of kill one enemy very quickly at a time. She has an ability which essentially applies almost like a curse to an enemy, and then a massive damage bonus to her single target normal attacks. So in concept, I think Yoimiya definitely has a place in the game, as even though a lot of the content is very AoE focused, not all of the content is, and having an extraordinarily strong single target unit can be very, very useful. However, the issue is that she still kind of falls along the lines of the 4-star bow characters in the game, namely that even though they are single target, they don't really do that much more damage than other available 4-stars that can deal that damage, but AoE. Honestly speaking, I find this very surprising. Her normal attack multipliers are insane. She has basically Claymore level multipliers, and yet attacks incredibly quickly. And then adding on top of that the massive damage bonus she gains to her normal attacks, I'm honestly surprised that she kind of just doesn't blow out all the other characters in the game in terms of single target damage. Now, some might say that this is pretty much due to the fact that her normal attacks have the sort of normal elemental application, meaning the 3-hit rule. But to be honest, if she didn't, and she applied Pyro with every single attack, she would pretty much always be the aura element and wouldn't really be able to increase her own damage with reactions. So unlike a character like Hu Tao, or kind of just polearms it seems in general, she can't just spam each attack and it apply Pyro every time. Now that being the case, and that her attacks don't apply Pyro with every hit, but every 3 hits, does allow us to use some comps that say Hu Tao wouldn't be able to. And there are 2 main comps I would have in mind. The first would be a Melt Vaporize comp. Basically use a Cryo character that can apply Cryo off field, like say perhaps Rosaria, but also use a character that can apply Hydra while off field as well, perhaps Mona, but most likely Xinqiu, as then you will vaporize and melt a good amount of her attacks during her normal attack sequence. However, within this, there's one comp that I do think would likely be quite good, which would be to use her alongside Ayaka. Now, Ayaka's burst only lasts 5 seconds, and so we'll only be able to apply Melt for a portion of Yoimiya's elemental skill, but her cryo application through her ultimate is so quick that she can actually melt all of Yoimiya's attacks. And then, once you finish going through Yoimiya's normal attack sequence, you can finish off by using her ultimate, then swapping to Ayaka, and then dealing damage with Ayaka to, 1, give you kind of the sub-DPS that you need for Yoimiya, but to also be applying Cryo so that you can also melt Yoimiya's ultimate ticks. And then, doing this, I would still use a Hydro character. But the Hydro character, of course, depends on who you have, but also who it is that you kind of want to buff more. Xinqiu will allow you to, even once Ayaka's ultimate is over, to continue to vaporize Yoimiya's normal attack string. Whereas Mona will provide a large damage bonus for both Ayaka's ultimate and Yoimiya's normal attacks during that short period of time. In addition, by the time you finish Yoimiya's normal attack string and use her ultimate, and it's time to swap to Ayaka and Yoimiya's downtime, Xinqiu's ultimate is probably basically almost over, whereas Mona's skill by that time is probably now off cooldown, and so you could swap to Mona first, throw out her elemental skill, and then be able to freeze for the majority of the duration on which you are on Ayaka before swapping back to Yoimiya. So either character I think would work quite well. It just depends on how you want to go about doing it. Now, because Ayaka's own ultimate does a significant amount of damage, I do think pairing Yoimiya and Ayaka together could be a very strong team, especially against single enemy fights, like say the Magukenki. Now, the next team comp would be an Overload Vaporize comp. If you've watched some of my videos about electro reactions, I made mention of, from my perspective, the most interesting elemental reaction is Electrocharged, because if you apply Electro and then Hydro, you can get both elements on the enemy at the same time, and thus if you hit with, say, a Pyro attack, we'll be able to both vaporize the hit and cause overload at the same time. Now, Hu Tao is a character that really can't do this because her Pyro application is simply too much for this type of comp, because when you apply Electrocharged, both elements are weakened, and so Xinqiu can no longer apply enough Hydro to vaporize all of Hu Tao's attacks. Precisely because Yoimiya applies Pyro at a less frequent rate, she actually can to both vaporize and Electrocharged all of her normal attack hits, which apply Pyro, as long as you do not use her ultimate during that same period of time. So for this type of comp, you will definitely need to play her in the way she is quote-unquote supposed to be played, with using her normal attack string, and then once it's over, using her normal attack string during her damage bonus from her skill, and then once it's over, popping her ultimate. Now, from my perspective, the best 2 characters to use with this would definitely be Xinqiu and Beidou, for a number of different reasons. Both of them can apply their element very, very often, as well as both of them can deal a very decent amount of damage themselves. In addition to this, Xinqiu provides a 25% damage reduction in addition to 20% of his Hydro damage, so if you give him a 5-star Hydro Goblet and have ascended him enough to gain his 20% damage bonus passive, he gives, just with those 2 things, nearly 40% damage reduction. And Beidou, with her talent at level 8, gives a 30% damage reduction. So you will barely take any damage at all, even if you do get hit, and as you are using a ranged character, you don't have to be in the thick of things all the time. And that also, because of this damage reduction and the fact that Zincho sort of can heal, you might actually decide, I don't even need a healer, and then just be able to use another character to either do damage or to buff the party. But of course, if you do want to use a healer, Bennett is probably going to be the best option, as he will not only give Yoimiya that attack bonus that she wants, but will also increase the damage of Beidou and Zincho, which will add significantly to your damage. The next character I would probably choose is actually Barbara. Because you're going to be applying Electro Charge in your rotation, as in probably using something along the lines of Zincho's elemental skill, then his ultimate, swapping to Beidou, using her elemental skill, and then her ultimate, and thus probably have Electro on the enemy, you could just give Barbara the Instructor set and the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers and end your rotation by swapping to her, just throwing out a single normal attack to pop the Instructor piece to give Yoimiya specifically another 120 Elemental Mastery, and then give Yoimiya that 48% attack bonus. Finally, you could use Sayu as well, however, she may mess up your elemental reactions. Now, the biggest issue with this comp probably is going to be Beidou's energy recharge, so you are going to have to attempt to manage that. Now, because in this type of team we don't really have a sub DPS and Yoimiya has decent downtime, you could simply spend that downtime on Beidou to try and give her more energy. Now, one quick tip about Beidou, for anyone who just got her through the recent event and thus isn't too familiar with her yet, her elemental skill, when you press it, will generate 2 electro particles as is usual with her 7.5 second cooldown. However, if you take hits with her shield or perfect parry, you actually generate more electro particles, generating instead of 2, but 3 and 4. So even if you have to wait a second or two, it's generally better to try and perfect parry, say, an attack to generate, say, 4 electro particles instead of just pressing it off cooldown and only generating 2. Now, with those two team comps out of the way, in terms of how I personally think about Yoimiya, she probably isn't one of the so-called must-pull characters. She basically has no AoE, and her single target isn't necessarily better than other characters in the game who can deal that damage to multiple enemies. However, if you are in need of a strong pyro character, like to have the safety of range, and don't like having to simultaneously manage Hu Tao's health and stamina, then Yoimiya could very well be a character for you. By no means do I think that she'll be weak. I definitely think she'll have her place in the game, but as she is a purely single target character, I do find her damage to be a little bit lacking. Personally, what I think I would have liked to have seen was her ultimate be a bit more of a curse, and either give the enemy that it's applied to some sort of debuff, or increase, say, the attack of characters that are dealing damage to it. I think that could have enabled her to have a bit of a better spot in the game's current state. And with that, I think we reached the end of the video. Though Ball sure doesn't seem to want it to end. How do you feel about Yoimiya? Are you thinking of pulling for her? If you have her, have you already tried the Vaporize Overload team comp? And if so, what do you think of it? If you pulled for both Ayaka and Yoimiya, how do you feel about how they work together? Please do let me know down below in the comments. And as usual, thank you for watching. Look forward to seeing you again next time. And I hope you all have a great day.